Hello everyone. So before we begin geometry, we are going to be doing practice lessons over solving quadratic equations and systems of equations. I actually incorporate these skills into geometry a lot because when you guys get to high school, you guys will be taking a class either called Integrated Math or Algebra 3-4. And when you get to that class, they will already expect you to know how to solve quadratic equations and systems of equations. So I want to keep your algebra skills fresh this year. So I will be using these skills a lot. However, this is the only review that we are going to do of these skills. So make sure that if you still don't understand these skills, that you do some research or practice on your own time. Now, just like last year, your notes are going to be set up similarly to what you saw last year. You'll have a learning target, and things will normally be split up by levels. Some levels might be combined, some might be separate. And then we will go over due dates at the beginning of each unit or each standard so you know when things are due. Now, the difference between this year and last year is this year, puzzle videos are going to be your homework always. So you will need to do these at home and you will need to take notes on them. And make sure that you listen to the videos. That's very important while you are taking notes. Please do not rely on the subtitles because you will miss information if you are relying on the subtitles. And then also with the puzzle videos, make sure to pause the video if you need time to write stuff down. And with the puzzle videos, sometimes I may give you time in class to get started if you have the practices done. Now, the practices actually are not included in your notes packets anymore. They will be separated, and you will get a note packet with just the notes, and then you will get the practices individually the days that we are doing practices. So that's why it doesn't say a page number for the practices. And then we will be doing a review packet for every standard this year. And you will get the review packet at the beginning of each standard. And it's expected that you work on your review packet as you are learning the material. Now for this practice unit, there will not be a review packet, but for every standard after this, there will be. And then there will be a summative assessment over every standard that we learn. For this one, this summative is not going to be included in your grade because this is just a practice unit and this is not part of the geometry curriculum. So let's get started. Today we are going to be learning or reviewing how to solve quadratic equations by doing different methods. We are going to review factoring and the quadratic formula. We are not going to review completing the square. All right, so factoring. Remember, your choices of factoring are the box method, the X method, and also GCF. Let's get started. So when we are factoring, we always need to make sure our equation is set equal to 0. So for number 1, I need to add this 2 over to set my equation equal to 0. So now I have an x squared minus a 10x plus a 24 is equal to 0. Now when we have 3 terms and your coefficient of x squared is 1, this can be factored using the box method. So what we do is we split up our x squared evenly, and then I need 2 numbers when multiplied together equal a positive 24, but when added together equal a negative 10. So think of your factors of 24. We have 1 and 24, 12 and 2, 6 and 4, and 8 and 3. So the 2 that should, kind of be stuck with us for this one is 12 and 2 and 6 and 4. Well, if I do a negative 6 times a negative 4, it does give me a positive 24. And a negative 6 plus a negative 4 does give me a negative 10. This does not mean that x is negative 6 or negative 4. A reminder that we need to put this in terms of our binomials. So it means that this is an x minus a 6 times an x minus a 4, and that equals 0. And then we set each of those binomials equal to 0 using the zero products property. And then now I solve for x in both of those. So I'm adding 6 to both sides in my first one to get x is 6. And I'm adding 4 to both sides in my second one to get x can be 4 as well. So you have two answers here and you need them both, 4 and 6. All right, moving on to number 2. We're going to start off by setting this equal to 0. I'm going to add 7 to both sides. So I wind up with a 7x squared minus a 14x plus a 7 is 0. Now, you can go ahead and do the x method. However, there's an easier way to do this one. If you notice that all three of your terms are divisible by a number, then divide it by that number. So I'm going to divide everything by 7. A 7x squared divided by a 7 would give me a 1x squared. A negative 14x divided by a 7 gives me a minus 2x. And a plus 7 divided by a 7 gives me a plus 1. And a 0 divided by a 7 is a 0. So I just made this problem easy for myself because now this becomes a box method problem. So now I'm completing the box method, splitting my x squared up evenly. I need two numbers when multiplied together equal positive 1, but when added together equal negative 2. Well, that's going to be a negative 1 and a negative 1. And so, rewriting these as binomials, I have an x minus a 1 times an x minus a 1 equals 0. And now since they're both the same, I don't need to rewrite both of them. I just need to set one of them equal to 0. Solving for x in that 1, I get x is equal to 1, and that's my only answer. All right, number 3, this one's different. This time you have two terms. So for this one, let's try using the Gcf method. So what that would mean is I need to take out my greatest common factor. Both my terms are divisible by a 2 and an x. And then when I take that 2x out, a 2x squared divided by a 2x is just an x, or a 1x, minus a 16x divided by a 2x is an 8. Now using the zero products property here, I can set this 2x equal to 0, and I can set this x minus 8 equal to 0. So solving for x in both of these, in my first one I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides, and I get x is 0. And in my second one I add 8 to both sides, and I get x is 8. Now you could have done this with the box method if you divided everything by 2. And then your c would just be 0 here. Your constant would be 0. But I feel like GCF is a little bit easier for that one. All right, number 4. We first need to set this equal to 0. So I'm going to start off by adding 3 to both sides. And so I have a 6x squared minus a 13x plus a 6, and that equals 0. And not everything's divisible by 6, so for this one we can't make it easier on ourselves, we just need to jump to the x method. So with our x method, in the top of our x, we're going to do our a times our c. So 6x squared times a 6 is a 36x squared. And in the bottom of your x, you're going to write down your b, which is a negative 13x. So I need two numbers when multiplied together equal a 36x squared, but when added together equal a negative 13x. So that's actually going to be a negative 9x and a negative 4x, and it doesn't matter which order you put that in. So now I just rewrite this whole thing, but instead of writing the negative 13x, I'm going to write the negative 9x and the minus 4x. So I have a 6x squared minus a 9x minus a 4x plus a 6 is equal to 0. Now what I do is I group my first two terms together and my last two terms together. And now I do the GCF out of my first two terms. The greatest common factor out of my first two terms would be a 3x. A 6x squared divided by a 3x would leave me with a 2x. And a minus 9x divided by a 3x leaves me with a minus 3. Now out of my next two terms, I need to take out an operation and a number. And I want my parentheses to be a positive 2x minus 3 once I take my GCF out. So I'm going to take out a minus 2. Because a negative 4x divided by a negative 2 gives me a positive 2x. So my first ones match. And a plus 6 divided by a negative 2 gives me a minus 3. So my parentheses match exactly, which is exactly what I want. So your binomials are, one of your binomials is the numbers on the outside of parentheses, so a 3x minus a 2. And your other binomial is one of the sets of parentheses. And now what we do is we take both of those and we set them equal to 0. And we solve for x. So, in my first one, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. I'm going to have a 3x is equal to a 2. In my second one, I add 3 to both sides. And I wind up with a 2x is equal to a 3. And then going back to my first one, I now need to divide by 3 on both sides. And I get x is equal to a 2/3. And in my second one, I divide by 2 on both sides. I get x is equal to a 3/2. So those are your answers for number 4. Number 5, same thing. We need to set this equal to 0, but be careful. We need to put this in the correct order. We need to flip these two around. So it should always go ax squared plus bx plus c. In this case, it's going to be minus bx minus c. So you need to be careful about what order your terms are in. Now I'm going to get that 7x to the other side by adding 7x and making sure that I add it to the correct term, which is that negative 3x. And so I have a 15x squared plus a 4x minus a 3 is equal to 0. So none of my terms are divisible by the same number, so I'm going to need to use the x method. And the top of my x is my a times my c. So a 15 times a negative 3 would be a negative 45 x squared. And the bottom of my x is my b, so that would be a 4x. I would need two numbers when multiplied together equal negative 45x squared, but when added together equal a 4x. That's going to be a positive 9x and a negative 5x, and it doesn't matter what order those go in. So now rewriting my 15x squared plus 4x minus 3, I'm going to write it as 15x squared plus 9x minus 5x minus 3. I'm going to group my first two terms together and my last two terms together. The greatest common factor out of my first two terms would be a 3x, and I'd be left with a 5x plus a 3. Out of my next two terms, I would need to take out a minus 1 to be left with a 5x plus a 3. Your parentheses need to match exactly, which they do here. So my binomials are a 3x minus a 1 and a 5x plus a 3. And now setting both of those binomials equal to 0, we then solve for x. I'm running out of time in this video, so I'll have you do that yourself, but you should wind up with x is equal to a 1/3 and a negative 3/5. We are going to review the quadratic formula in the next video.